Hi, this is Laura Judah with Champion Builders Center, and I'm going to talk to you today about the cycles of God. Um, we've just completed the fall feast season, and that season is about first awakening, then returning to the Lord and repenting, and after that, entering into a season of rest and rejoicing in what the Lord has done and looking forward to the new year ahead. We've just entered the year 5779. And that cycle of the fall feasts is representative of the end times. It's the one feast season that has not yet been completely fulfilled, and it won't be until Jesus returns for his bride. Part of that cycle is also about deliverance and judgment. And so that's kind of the broader picture that I wanted to talk about today. We know a lot about the Exodus, and the Exodus tells us the story of God's deliverance. He delivered the Israelites out of Egypt, out of oppression, and his goal was leading them into the promised land. What many people are not that familiar with is the other side of that story, which is the judgments of God. And there's two major Old Testament stories that represent that picture. And that's the Assyrian invasion of Israel and the Babylonian invasion of Judah. Now, Israel and Judah became a divided kingdom right after the time of Solomon. And what I want to focus on specifically today is in Isaiah chapter 7. What had been taking place between that time or during that whole time of the divided kingdom up to this point was about 200 years where the northern kingdom, or what we call Israel, was divided from the southern kingdom, which is called Judah. And the northern kingdom had about 20 different rulers during that time period. They were all evil kings, meaning that they led the people of Israel away from God, and they integrated the worship of the one true God in with all false gods. And so they had this multi-dimensional type of worship that included God, but they were polytheistic. And of course, this watered down what the people of Israel knew to be true and turned them away from the true worship of one true God. Judah remained more loyal to God. They had different kings also, about 12 different kings during that 200-year period. Some of them were evil, but there were many reformers in that time period as well. And so they remained a little bit more loyal, but they followed that cycle of returning to the Lord, being restored, and then eventually turning away from the Lord and falling into a cycle of judgment. And the Lord always used those judgment cycles to try to draw the people back to him. It wasn't for a purpose of destroying them. It was always with a redemptive thread of trying to draw the people's hearts back to himself so that he could bless them the way that he wanted to and the way that he promised in his word to do. And so we're going to move into Isaiah 7 and look at some of the things that the Lord is saying through Isaiah the prophet, because they're so critical for our day. There is a huge parallel between what the nation of America, as well as every other nation on the face of the planet, is facing in these end times. And we can learn a lot by understanding how the Lord is working through a season like this and prepare our hearts for what God's going to be doing in the end times. Because he wants us to be on board with him. He wants us to understand how he works. He wants us to understand his heart and his purpose so that we don't get offended at the things that we see happening. So let's jump in to chapter 7 of Isaiah. What's going on here is that Ahaz is the king of Judah. And he's been threatened by two different kings, the king of Assyria, whose name is Rezin, and the king of Israel, whose name is Pekah. And they are planning to carry out an attack on Jerusalem. Ahaz is very worried. And God mercifully sends Isaiah to talk to him and tell him, you don't have to worry anymore. He says, don't fear the fierce anger of those two burned out embers, King Rezin of Syria and Pekah, son of Remaliah. So God is trying to bring a word of comfort to the king of Judah, but he's not receiving it very well. The key thing that I want to point out here, and I want to make sure that I say this very clearly, when I'm going to speak here about things that are political, as we see written in the Word, it's talking about kings and nations coming against one another, just like we see in our day. We're talking about presidents, we're talking about world leaders, we're talking about different factions, even in our own country. We talk about Democrats and Republicans as political entities, but that's not what God's talking about. God's talking about good versus evil, and he will use whoever he will use to accomplish his purpose to drive evil off the planet. And so I want to be very clear that though I may bring up things like President Trump and what we see the Democrats doing, it's not about Democrats versus Republicans. It's about good versus evil in the hearts of men. And all of us can have the propensity towards evil in our hearts. That's why we need a Savior, and his name is Jesus. But ultimately, God uses whoever he will to accomplish his purposes. So let's look at what he's saying to King Ahaz, who was not a perfect man. He started off to be kind of a mediocre king, and he got very bad towards the end of his reign. But the Lord still is talking to him, and he's assuring him that he's with him. And he tells Ahaz this invasion that these two nations are plotting will never happen. It's never going to take place. Syria is no stronger than its capital Damascus, and Damascus is no stronger than its king Rezin. As for Israel, within 65 years, it will be crushed and completely destroyed. Israel is no stronger than its capital Samaria, and Samaria is no stronger than its king Pekah. Unless your faith is firm, I cannot make you stand firm. Now those are verses 7 through 9 out of the New Living Translation. So God is clearly saying to him, I will make you stand firm if you will believe in me, if you will believe in my word. Now we see the same thing happening in our nation. There is a great division, and it's taking place along the lines of a conservative party being headed up by Donald Trump, and the Liberal Party, or the Democratic side of the House, saying they're trying to stage a coup against our president. They're wanting to impeach him. They're wanting to install their own leadership. They've already got people chosen. There's a shadow government in operation here that is trying to oppose the duly elected government that the people chose and that God chose. Doesn't mean that Donald Trump is a perfect president or a perfect man. It's just the one that he's chosen. For whatever God's reasons are, it's not ours to question that. All we have to do is stand with God and do exactly what he's telling King Ahaz here. Stand firm in your faith. Not in what you believe about a party, but stand firm in your faith, because I am bringing something new to America. I am doing a new thing in America. The Lord goes on and he presents this challenge to King Ahaz, and he says, ask the Lord your God for a sign of confirmation. Make it as difficult as you want, as high as the heavens or as deep as the place of the dead. But the king refused and said, no, I will not test the Lord like that. King Ahaz takes a religious stand against the Lord. Foolish move on his part. He says, no, God, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to take you up on your challenge. So then the Lord says, well, okay, since you're trying my patience, I'm going to give you a sign anyway. And there's going to be repercussions for the fact that you are choosing not to believe me. And then he gives him a hard word, and he says, the virgin will conceive a child and she will give birth to a son and call him Emmanuel. And by the time this child is old enough to choose what is right and wrong, he will be eating yogurt and honey. Now, those words are saying that by the time that child is old enough, there's going to be a famine in the land. There's going to be destruction that comes to your land because you are choosing not to listen to me. That is the word of warning that he's bringing. And then he says, I'm going to bring things on your nation that are very horrible. And I'm going to use the king of Assyria to do it. So he chooses the king of Assyria. He wasn't a good guy. He wasn't a Christian. He wasn't anybody that we would want to have come against our nation. But God chose him to bring judgment on Judah because they wouldn't listen to him. And he goes on to describe and calls the king of Assyria a razor. Down in verse 20, he says, I will hire a razor from beyond the Euphrates River, the king of Assyria, and I will use it to shave off everything, your land, your crops, and your people. And then he says, the land will be basically barren, a vast expanse of briars and thorns. And the only thing that you're going to be left with is a few cows and sheep and goats, so that there will be milk for the people of your land. So the key issue here that God is saying is about our faith. And I really want to drive home this message today, because if we can't believe God in the midst of hardship coming on our nation, we really don't have a leg to stand on. We have to believe what God says. We have to believe the leaders that he chooses. And he's chosen President Trump, and President Trump is doing things to bring restoration to our land. God is with President Trump, and he's promised to bring a season of restoration to our land. It's a cycle. I can't say how long that cycle is going to last, but what I do know is right now we have a chance to move this nation into a place of prosperity by moving out the evil forces and the shadow government that's trying to destroy us. Like him or not, President Trump is the one that is being used, and we are standing by faith in our God. And I just want to encourage everyone to stand with our president, to stand with a conservative, constitutional perspective that God has used to uphold this nation all these years. He gave us a government, a constitution written by our forefathers based on principles of worshiping God and being a people who came here to find the opportunity to worship him freely. That is what we're standing on. That is what we're believing for. And in this next election, we must consider that is the primary thing that we're doing when we go to the polls. We're not voting for Republican or Democratic. We are voting for restoration for our land that is being led by our King of Kings and Lord of Lords, Jesus Christ. And so I just want to exhort you, pray, believe, and vote for the things that God has on his agenda right now. I bless you. And next time we come together, we'll look at chapter 8, which goes further into this storyline of God bringing restoration to our land and exhorting us to believe in him. Bless you for now. Bye.